January 17th, 2026. Well, lots going on here, and I want to point out that, these videos, I cover some interesting things in the end of this as well, which might have a different slant, so stick on it. But I'll start off with the insurrection in Minneapolis. Of course, the President Trump is hesitating to impose the Insurrection Act. I tend to either that or I think just call up the National Guard and federalize them, because in any event, it looks to me like we need to have more people there, largely just to protect the ICE people from all these protesters, to minimize the actual clashes between the protesters and the ICE agents just doing their job. And I think that would be an interesting step. Now, you could say, well, because that recent Supreme Court decision, that ruled in favor of the appellate court, which I think still covers, I believe, Minnesota. But I tend to think the circumstances in Minnesota here are quite a bit different than what you had going on in Chicago, for instance. I don't think it was nearly as intense of a problem here, and also that the original motivation was a bit different also. So, and also the decision wasn't really final. It left open the issue that the government needed to explain a little bit better why they needed to do it. I think here the explanation is pretty clear cut. The situation is spinning out of control, and both ICE agents and citizens are getting injured, and it would be better to have more people to put a barrier between ICE and the protesters, and also to protect federal building and other assets. I mean, you're having FBI truck broken into and weapons stolen, government papers stolen, and so forth. So anyhow, that's kind of I think maybe short of the Insurrection Act would just be to try to do what he's done previously and see whether the courts successfully blocked it this time. Because, it seems like the situation is a little bit more urgent. The other thing, of course, that's also interesting that's being done is that apparently a federal investigation has started into Governor Walz and Mayor Frey over their basic encouragement of the insurrectionist activists and basically encouraging this action. So I don't know how far that will go, whether you could really get a conviction. That may be a little bit up in the air. Well, it depends on what the investigation were to find out. But I think that it was an interesting development also. The thought of actually arresting and putting these people on trial is an interesting idea, because they really are interfering with federal law enforcement in many ways, just as much as the protesters, in my opinion. So, but on the other hand, there are political blowback consequences of taking too rash of an action, even though it's really justified, because you have a public that seems to be fed a lot of nonsense with the left-wing media and so forth, and there's a tendency to focus on the wrong issues. So at any rate, that's kind of my current view on that we need to bring in some extra personnel. Maybe just the local National Guard could be mobilized and federalized and see what happens. So anyhow, so if you like these videos, please give me a like, subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. You can also follow me on Rumble also, because I'm posting there as well. So anyhow, moving on to the Iranian situation, which I covered in my last video. It seems like that the situation may have finally cooled down there a little bit. As of last read, it looks like that I guess it was on Wednesday, because a lot of what we're getting is like a day or so late. The videos you see on like Fox News and other news sources look a little bit like what happened last weekend, and apparently recently, I think it was Wednesday, they had a major pro-regime protest that was much bigger and a lot more peaceful. And so and the other thing that seems to be stopping the whole operation that was kind of underway is that there was a threat to hang a whole bunch of people, up to 800. And I have a feeling that many of these people were probably either Mossad or CIA assets, and maybe not actual officers, although some could have been officers also, if you understand the distinctions there. And so I noticed that the Prime Minister of Israel was urging Trump not to attack Iran, and I've also hear that a lot of the Gulf states are saying the same thing, and the president of Turkey is saying the same thing. And that the latter falls into what I said in my previous video. I think a lot of the real people in the street were probably the Kurds, because they have their own objection and separatist movement that spreads throughout the region from Iran all the way to Turkey. And so I think that's why Turkey's a little nervous that if Iran were to really, the government were to really fall, that might lead to a Kurdish rebellion against any kind of central government in the area. And so that I don't think that the Turks want that. And also the fact is, I don't think that any of the countries there are prepared to really defend themselves against the Iranian missile counterstrikes. And also bombardment is not necessarily a very effective way to actually protect people in the street environment. So, and of course, most importantly, the assets we need are deployed in the Caribbean or alternatively in the South China Sea. And I guess the carrier strike group from the South China Sea is on its way there. Will arrive one of these days, pretty soon, I guess, but how long it takes to sail around in India and then come back up, So, and of course, then there's the issue of logistics and so forth. So I guess we're getting prepared for some possibility. I tend to think it probably isn't going to happen now, that the regime isn't anywhere near actually falling, and I think an attack would simply lead to missile counterstrikes against our bases and lead to fatalities of U.S. troops. And then where do we go? Do we escalate the conflict and actually deploy for a real war? I mean, this could get a little spun up. The other possibility is that where are they going to hold all these people they've arrested? What if they were actually being held in the Iranian Republican Guard Corps bases? And we bomb those bases, and then what happens? We actually may be killing some of the very people that we're supposedly trying to protect. So we'll see what goes. I tend to think maybe this one will pass with not a whole lot happening. Could be wrong. We'll have to see in a few days when all the requisite forces get into place, and we have other things to issue, you might say. And then, of course, that gets us on to our next objective issue, Greenland, which this is one area where I often say I'm about an 80-20 supporter of Trump, meaning I support about on 80% of the issues. Well, the Greenland is one I don't. I think this is a very bad idea. And I heard Stephen Miller just a short time ago on Fox explaining the rationale, which to me is something like, well, if you're not a strong enough country to defend something, then somebody that's bigger has a right to go take it. I'm like, what? I mean, that sounds like the complete opposite of what we've used in the rationale for so many of the interventions we've engaged in, including the current ongoing one in Ukraine, where we spent billions of dollars saying that Russia has no right to take territory from Ukraine just because maybe they could do it. The other issue is the U.S. national security claim. And I'm like, what is the claim? I mean, from a practical point of view, we have a very strategic base there, as I pointed out before, which is a radar station to detect missiles coming across the North Pole, presumably from Russia or conceivably now China. And we have also a station like in Britain and then over in North Dakota and then Alaska to cover the northern area. And it's to characterize any attack and determine what level of response we need to make and when we need to make it. And that's a pretty safe facility, and we have our personnel there. And if we need more security, we can put more security to protect our base. So the idea that somehow, I don't know, I mean, Russia and China have an interest in it. I mean, if, for example, I guess Denmark was going to invite China in to, I don't know, do what? I don't think that's happening, and I think it probably definitely won't happen now. So why, at least unless they want to get China to try, the fact of the matter is that the United States has the power to take that island anytime we want to take it. And I don't really see the rationale that's being put forward to do it. It will definitely really annoy our NATO allies in Europe, and I don't. What the ultimate consequence of that would be, I don't know. It might be, I don't know, just a protest or something, but I think it would be an ongoing antagonism, I believe, that is just unnecessary. And I don't know what, somehow I guess he thinks he's going to get the rare, is it really about rare earth minerals and we want the islands so we can make, don't have to pay for them. We still have to pay for them. It's just our companies would have to develop them. Again, that's unclear exactly where they're going, but I think it's a bad idea. And we have what we need there right now anyhow. As far as the idea of these European countries sending troops there to protect it in very trivial numbers, I mean, obviously they can't stop us from what we want to do. I mean, if we want to do it. But we'll see how this goes down in Congress. As I pointed out before, the other Denmark strategy is to simply name a price. I'm not sure Congress would pay any significant price for it. I mean, it's hard to know. I think that at this point, the way it's been introduced has probably been so negative that you would have every Democrat just about all voting against it, and probably certain Republicans would too, which would divide the party and cause more division for no good reason. Anyway, that's my thought on that subject. This is going on. Something I didn't get around to with all the other news that's just happening is that during one of the, that was about a week ago now, but I think it's worth discussing, is the development that Russia has used this Oreshnik Missile for the second time, and it gives me a little bit more insight on it, what I've been seeing. Early on, I was unclear whether this was purely a propaganda weapon or is it a real weapon. I mean, on one level, it might seem to be not that cost effective to use an intermediate range ballistic missile with conventional type warhead to attack. And this is basically a kinetic strike weapon. As near as I understand it, the best information I've got so far suggests that, and there's a bit of we don't know exactly what its throw weight is, but essentially there's about 36 projectiles that this thing can bring down with a reasonable amount of accuracy. Think of it like a shotgun pattern, but the CEP of a missile like that is probably somewhere around 600 feet, which means that it drew a circle about 600 feet, and about half of the projectiles would land in that. And the other half will scatter further out on a distribution pattern. And the kinetic energy of these is about equivalent to their weight in high explosive. As we know, even bombs, are only maybe a third high explosive or less, so something in that range. So this is, at least most bombs. So you're having a fair amount of energy being released in this thing. And it would, as a weapon, it would probably be most effective against an industrial facility, a building of some sort, like an air base, a shipyard, maybe with ships in it to hit the ships, things of that sort. And so there was a lot of discussion about what the target was, which apparently for security reasons, Ukraine is not really releasing it nor showing any pictures of what the damage was this time. The understanding is there's a facility there in the area around Lviv that was near an airport where they basically are repairing F-16s and maintaining F-16s and MiG-29s of the Ukrainian Air Force. And apparently that was probably the target. And of course, a weapon of that sort could do devastating damage to that sort of thing. And the other aspect is that one version I've heard is that because of the plasma that develops on re-entry of the atmosphere at the speed it's going, that this has a tendency to absorb the energy from X-band radars that are used in the things like the ballistic, missile defense systems, like the Patriot or whatever, and that therefore, essentially, the energy is just kind of absorbed into the plasma and doesn't give the kind of return you'd have, and so they had no warning of the attack. When it came in, it just came, at least from the point of view of radar, tactical warning. The Russians did notify us apparently 3 hours ahead of time they were going to launch a missile, which is a normal procedure when either the United States or Russia or I think China do ballistic missile tests to notify everybody they're going to do it, so people don't think this is the beginning of World War III or something. The North Koreans, of course, don't have that courtesy. So at any rate, this is an interesting weapon, and I've heard estimates it costs something like $20 million. I'm not sure. Given the Russian labor rates, this might be $100 million in U.S. dollars if we made the same system or something similar. So, it probably would be against really high value targets, an effective system. And apparently they're deploying them in Belarus right now, and they're actually in serious production of them. And it appears like this was something they had in the works for years, but even before the Ukraine war, and have simply used the current situation as the test program reached a level at where they were ready to actually deploy. And so, at any rate, that puts presumably all of Europe all the way to Britain under a threat of a weapon that's non-nuclear, and therefore is a little bit more usable, if you will, than a nuclear weapon would be, in the sense that the consequence of nuclear use has its own practical and political consequences, including radiation and escalation of more intense, nuclear attacks. So, anyway, so I just thought I'd run by what I learned on that. It's something that kind of what my assessment essentially of that situation is. So it's something we'll be looking forward to as time goes forward and see what comes of this. Of course, we're going to be deploying our own systems. I think also the Typhoon system, which is a little bit different kind of system, but we also have a hypersonic missile in development too. So, at any rate, so it goes. It looks like the INF treaty is dead for the moment. So I'll be posting this on YouTube and Rumble as always, and the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below. So all for now.